I actually think that from the wedding industry perspective as a venue owner, some of the best information that I can find is by looking at other vendors that are not like venue owners. Looking at photographers, looking at wedding planners, things of that nature, because while they're not your client sometimes finds them first, or they're like more excited about those particular people. And so I find that like looking at my venue as a photographer or talking to those other vendors on what they want to see in a space, it allows for me to better create my package, my offerings. They see all different venues and all different models, and that can kind of be a unique way to look at things that can allow you to grow faster.
Welcome to the Venue RX. On this show, we document and share best practices around owning, operating, and managing world-class wedding venues.
What is up, everyone? Jonathan here with the Venue RX, and I am really excited about this show today. It's one of my favorite parts of this entire project that we have here at the Venue RX, the Venue Owner Series. And we talk to incredible wedding and event venue owners all over the country. We learn what it takes to actually own and operate a venue. And today we have with us Kasie Romagno. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
Well, I'm excited to hear about your venue. You are in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, right? And you, just before we got on, we were talking a little bit, you were teaching kindergarten. We were kind of joking about it being on Zoom, right?
Yes, yeah. I'm eligible to be a teacher. I graduated with a degree in elementary education, and I graduated during COVID, so we taught kindergarten via Zoom. And my family, we're a family-run business. I kind of fell into this role, and it just ended up being a really awesome fit and more of a fit for myself and my family than working in education at the time that we started. And then it just really took off. So now, I don't know if I'll ever get back to teaching because the wedding industry has a tight hold on me.
So I'm curious, and I think there might be some kind of relating threads here, but why teaching? Like, why is that what you wanted to start with?
It's kind of a funny story. I went to school originally for hotel, restaurant, and tourism. And my family's background, we own a concert venue. So I worked as a bar manager through the end of high school into college. And that was like my original path. And then as I like looked at my life as a whole, which like you're so young, so you don't really know what you're doing, I was like, I don't know if I really want to work nights and weekends, which is funny now. So I said, I really like teaching. Education's really cool. That was like my OG dream when I was a little kid. So I kind of went back to that path, and it was really enjoyable for school. I always joked that working in bar and working with 5-year-olds is kind of the same, like drunk people and little kids, it's like the same thing. And then somehow I kind of just fell back into what I was originally going to school for, which was like that event planning and like this industry. And so that's kind of how I ended up back here. It's a very weird thing to have started college for one thing. I took extra classes to catch up when I switched my major, and then to graduate, get my teaching certification, and end up back in what I started is just so bizarre.
Well, it was funny when you mentioned the thing about the kindergartners. Last night, I was at a vendor Friendsgiving that we had at one of the venues that we manage. And I was talking to one of the coordinators, and she had the exact same thing. She said she was a elementary school teacher, and she said she was drawing a lot of similarities between that and hurting the groomsmen,
It's really common. I find so many people that I meet within the wedding industry came from the education space. I do some work in photography as well. A lot of my photography friends worked in education before they switched into the wedding industry. It just somehow has parallel skill sets of like organization and, time management and all these different things that kind of just somehow meld together to make great wedding professionals.
Yeah, it's amazing. It really ends up being people skills and influencing human behavior. And I think the other cool tie back to the education piece is as you start scaling up and you start getting team members and you start hiring people, you're again back in that education seat where you're, teaching and you're inspiring and you're helping people to kind of get into the system that you've created for the venue. So That's awesome. Well, today we're going to get really detailed. We ask a lot of the questions about, how you started, the systems that you're using, all of the different things. Before we really dive in there, I want to know a little bit about the journey of the venue, because this it looks like a very historic venue, very, very kind of interesting and unique way that you have it set up. So I'm curious, kind of take me back 4 or 5 years ago, whenever you first started the venue, and give me the story of how it came to be.
Sure. I'm going to take you back a little bit further than that, actually. So we're family owned. I do all of the day-to-day work, and my parents are our financial backing and kind of the original the piece that we needed to start. And so their history is in real estate, which it's funny. I was listening to an episode of your podcast earlier and you were talking about that real estate piece. So that's kind of where their background is from, is in flipping houses was the original start. And then from there, they opened a concert venue in the early 2000s. And that is actually their first step into working with historical buildings. So the concert venue that they opened was in a historical building. That comes with its own fun, unique set of skills, right? From renovations and restoring to the rules about keeping things the way that they were in historical. And so they started it kind of as a flip. To bringing back that history piece. And the original plan was we're gonna flip it back into exactly what it was, so it doesn't get turned into apartments. We're gonna start the business piece of it so that someone else can come in and take it over and move along. And now it's been 20 years and they're still doing concerts every day. So it didn't work exactly how they originally planned, but that's kind of how they got started. And then from there, this space kind of while different, the plan is not to sell the business. It has that same kind of feel, same kind of business plan where we took a historical building. It's an old National Guard Armory building. So it was used for social gatherings, for trainings for the military, things of that nature, up until just a couple of years ago before we purchased. And then the building, you can't really do anything with it because it's just like this concrete double-lined brick building. It's huge, but it has so very little use. And so most likely what would have happened is it could have been torn down or it would have been left vacant. And so it had that same passion. So bringing it back to its previous uses, bringing back that historical piece, and kind of refurbishing it, but keeping things really the same, with a new use, but the same use. So armories were always used for social gatherings. We've just kind of taken it to the top level of social gatherings, which is mostly weddings. And that's kind of what we opened with during COVID.
Wow. So help me understand kind of that timeline, because that must have been, you're in the middle of restoration. It sounds like did you start this project pre-COVID and then it kind of led into COVID, or was COVID currently going on and then you started?
They purchased in January of 2020. So right before. Wow. It kind of worked out to our favor, I think, actually, in the long run. We did all of our renovations ourselves. We don't hire really outside contractors for the most part. My dad is incredibly handy. My husband went to school for carpentry and his father-in-law is also really handy. So it was truly a family effort. My mom and I did all the design work. My husband, my dad, my father-in-law did all of the renovations themselves. And then we opened in November of 2020 with our first event, and our first wedding was May of 2021. So we really started to market and book weddings in January of 2021, which it's I had to refresh myself on the timeline because I feel like COVID, it just blurs all things together, right? So there was still a lot of restrictions on guest counts at that point. But our building is huge. We've got 6,000 square feet just on the main floor in the main space alone. And so even at, say, a 50% cap, I'm looking at 125 guests. So we were able to kind of help people that were in a pinch that needed to move their wedding and find a new space. Maybe their venue was they were hitting the max and now they need to be at 50%. So moving was a better option. Maybe their venue closed or they eloped during COVID. We ended up with a full book in that fall season of 2021. So I think it did actually work to our benefit to be ready to go during that time. And the true shutdown was when we did all our renovations. So that kind of also worked to our benefit, surprisingly.
Totally. But what bravery it must have took. I mean, I know where I was during that whole time. And I mean, I think many other people thought that maybe the event industry wouldn't rebound the same, that we wouldn't. I mean, it was a very scary time. There's a lot of uncertainty. Obviously, we look back now and, we have some hindsight. For anyone who's newer in the industry and the business, like that must have been pretty scary to, project forward that this was going to play out successfully. Was there ever a sense for you that, like a question in your mind of like, is this the right, like, are we doing the right thing? Or was it very much like you knew that it was going to be over soon?
I definitely think there's always a question, right? You don't know what will come of the industry. Will it rebound? Will it be the same as it was before? Will it be better or worse? I think that's still kind of a question on like, as things continue to roll out. We don't have the history of pre-COVID numbers to kind of gauge where things are at now. So in some ways that's a blessing because we're just like, this is the market that we started with. And then in some ways it makes it really hard to gauge like, are the numbers growing the way that they should be? Are they not? All of that kind of thing. But I do think we also kind of went in with a really unique perspective where a lot of times a wedding venue, if you're opening like the goal was weddings and you have a full vision, I think we kind of had a blindfold on, and their original plan was more of this like social gathering space, right, for all different kinds of events. And as we started to put in money and time and design, it kind of grew into like, oh, this is a space for weddings and we need to price ourselves for weddings and we need to market for weddings. And that's kind of, it just like slowly shifted that way. So the jump in wasn't quite so like aggressive because when we're talking in 2020 as things were starting to, pan out, it wasn't necessarily like, oh, we're going to enter into the wedding industry when there's like not weddings happening. It was more like, we're going to have birthday parties. We're going to host a Sweet 16. Maybe someone will want to get married here. And then as our renovations finished and we built all our tables from scratch and all of those things, I started to look around and do my research. And that's really when I became more of like the hands-on manager day to day. And I was like, oh no, like we're not just gonna $500, you can come and do your party here. Like this is going to be something a little bit bigger than that. And we need to, kind of make a plan accordingly. So it kind of happened gradually instead of just being, quite so straightforward.
Kasie, you kind of alluded to it just now, but I'm really curious. And this is a question that I've seen pop up quite a bit in wedding forums, venue forums. How long did you keep your other job as a teacher prior to shifting fully into the events industry?
I had another unique situation where I graduated as we were starting. So I actually never got a full-time teaching position. I taught as a substitute. I taught my student teaching where, you work full-time as a teacher, but you don't get paid in Pennsylvania. So I was already doing this position as I was finishing that. So I was doing tours in the evenings and on the weekends. We were starting to show our space, styled shoots, things of that nature, but we hadn't really gotten into the industry fully as far as like actually running weddings. And then I graduated in May. That's when our first wedding happened. And then by the fall, when we were booked out full time, I had, school's out and I had really gotten my fully immersed. And then I just didn't go back in the fall for subbing and I didn't apply for full-time positions. I just kind of went straight in full force. So there wasn't like quite so much of like a decision of like, okay, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to do this. But I will say that the concert industry, our other business, we still have that fully as well. So we were kind of doing double duty up until basically this year where like now I'm fully just working this venue and this business. And I have a team that's just working this venue and this business as opposed to before where we were kind of splitting costs and splitting staff and, doing a little bit of a double team thing until we got fully where we need to be.
So that business is you said family business, correct?
Yeah.
So you get paid then by your family. Like is like a family member your direct boss? Like, do you have direct reports, or do you have like employees who are family members?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a unique situation because that's just the way we grew up. So my parents have owned our concert venue since I was 5. And so when I was 14, I worked concessions, and then from there I became a bar manager by the time I was 18, 19. And then it just kind of progressed from there. So my parents have always been my boss. And I did go out and get other jobs and experience different, a corporate setting and work in a bar and a restaurant and different things so that I knew what it was like to work for other people. And I wanted those experiences, but I've always had that dynamic in front of me. My mom and dad have always worked together my whole life. And so my husband now works in our family business. He works directly with my dad on a day-to-day basis. But for the wedding venue, they're more of like a financial backing. And so when we're making financial decisions, those are things that I run by them. But our day-to-day workings, our marketing, all of our regular plans, our staff, those things come directly to me. And this kind of is my space to run.
That's super cool. I wanted to ask that question because I think the idea of a family business, depending on who you're talking to, can have a very positive or a very negative connotation in people's minds. And I think family relationships, in fact, it's funny that we're talking about this. I'm kind of going through some of this with my own family. I have 3 younger sisters, and, my mom, she's very entrepreneurial. And, there's kind of this question of, if we were to work together on a project, and my sisters already do work with her on a couple of things. And my wife helps with her, with some social media and some marketing stuff and things like that. But the question is kind of like how do you have those boundaries? How do you have appropriate and respectful communication? Obviously our parents are older than us, right? And so there's some of that like respect that we need to give, but then also, it's a give and take. So for anyone who's listening to this going, oh my gosh, I could never work with my spouse, I could never work with my parents, are there some things that you've done and maybe your family's done to really set you up for success with these family and professional relationships?
I think open communication and clear boundaries is the biggest one, right? So even when I first was younger, I mean, we were raised in this entrepreneurial like world. So my parents never shielded us from discussions they were having about business. My mom's always done all of the accounting for their businesses. My dad is more of the CEO type. He's doing the day-to-day running. And so we've got to experience them setting their own boundaries, watching them shift from my mom's the boss at home to my dad's the boss in the office, that kind of thing. And so I kind of just grew up learning those kinds of things. And so if you're new to that, if you're opening a business as a family, those boundaries have to be discussed so that you know who's a boss where, when it's your turn to listen and when it's your turn to lead. And so I know that regardless of what business we're looking at, my dad's the leader. And I'm going to listen first. But then also there's such a blessing in working with your family because I think it allows for you to speak a little bit more openly. So, I mean, I don't hold my punches. I'm pretty blunt when it comes to what I believe. It's worked out fairly well for us. I don't know that my dad would have put our prices where they are. I don't know that he would have taken the approach that I have to running a venue. But he's allowed for me to lead in that area. And my husband and I, he's a boss over in the concert industry. And so if I'm ever helping there, I know he's the leader. And when he's over here building me new props and fixing my light bulbs, he knows that I'm the boss here. And so it's just about, establishing all those boundaries and then continuing to have the conversations that you need to. And then when you go home, you turn it all off and you start again tomorrow.
That's really well articulated. And I appreciate that perspective. It's really refreshing. And I think this industry specifically lends itself to family businesses because, you just like you said, you have someone who is in construction or someone who's in design, and then you come together and, with the operations people. You mentioned something right there at the end that I want to highlight really quick, and then we'll move on to more venue stuff. But I just think this is super relevant for our industry specifically. You mentioned going home and turning it off.
Yeah.
Is that realistic? Does that happen? Are there kind of some boundaries that you've instituted to help you turn it off, or does it never actually get turned off?
It could be either. It's really, I think it's how you set up your business. I think that it's very difficult to turn off, especially in the entrepreneurial field of any kind. And especially when it's your business, you want to give it your all. But I think that my experience watching my parents maybe have harder times turning it off has allowed for me to be really, really clear on what I want in this industry. So I went to school to be a teacher because I was worried about those kinds of things, right? I wanted a career, well, and teachers don't have this actually at all, but I wanted a career that was a 9 to 5 because I wanted to be able to go home and be with my family and not be running back out to do all the things that I watched my dad and my mom do for my entire childhood. And so I try to set those boundaries. It's like, I don't know that there is an industry that totally allows for that. I'm sure there is, but it's not one I found. But what I do is, we have business hours. And so I try to be fairly strict on when I go home. I have an 8-month-old, and he comes to work with me every day. And so when we go home, it's his turn to be front and center. And I really want to be present as a mom. So we turn off our email, we turn off our phones, and I try to, establish those boundaries of business hours. It's incredibly difficult in this industry because your client is someone who also works a 9 to 5. And so they're planning their wedding in their off hours. And so they want your hours to be their off hours, but you also have the same hours as them. So we try to find a balance. I think it's building a team of people that are willing to be flexible and picking which days you're flexible. So I have full-time staff. My full-time team member, we kind of split, she's on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday as like her evening hours. I take Sunday mornings, and we kind of try to be available for couples, but also know that our client, the one that really, really wants to work with us, and the one that we really want to work with, is going to be respectful of our boundaries and our time. And so they're going to make the time to come and see the venue when we have the hours to do it. And we're going to make the time for them when we need to, but when it's not an emergency, we'll get back to them on Tuesday. Trying to kind of keep it really concise and then use your judgment on when it's necessary to be available at home.
Fair. It's interesting. There may be someone listening to this who thinks that just sounds incredible, right? They're like, wow, like that's where we're trying to get, but maybe they're really out of control of their schedule. Maybe they don't have that team member. You mentioned a lot of those things, and I want to get to team and I want to get to systems and things like that. But before we jump in any further, could you describe, like if someone's just listening to this in audio format, when you walk up to the venue, what are you looking at? What's the vibe of the venue? I know capacity we touched on a little bit, but could you give us a little bit more of kind of like what the venue looks like, and then access hours and the other event venue details?
Sure. So we're incredibly unique in our area, right? So if you were to go to Philly or New York City, we're one of a million, because an industrial space in a downtown city is pretty, it's easy to find. We live in the country. So there's not this available to you. Most of the venues in our area are going to be banquet style, what I would very kindly refer to as a wedding factory, where they've got all of the pieces of the day already put in place on site, florists, caterers. They work with these specific photographers, all of those things. And maybe they have 5 weddings a day, or a country club, golf course, things of that nature. So a standalone venue, while it's not new, it's new to our space. A venue where you bring in your own vendors is new to our space. And it's also a downtown venue, which is not very common in the Poconos that people are looking for outdoor spaces, and we're fully indoors. So we're located downtown. We're 5 minutes from hotels, restaurants, bars, things of that nature. When you pull up, it's a exposed brick building. We're not a big parking lot, luxurious, fancy space. We're more urban. And when you come inside, it's going to be a very different experience. So we've got 20-foot high ceilings with all historical steel beams exposed. We've got lots of exposed brick, original wood floors. And then we've kind of created a space that like it allows for it to still be historic and the same, but then it's made with weddings specifically in mind. So when you walk in, you're going to see the vaults where they would have held their ammunition, and those are turned into like our bar rooms where our bartenders will serve out of to our couples. We use a curtain system to split our main floor space so we can hold all of the pieces of your day without having to have multiple rooms. So the curtain system hides the tables for your reception. You have your ceremony in one spot, cocktail hour in the other, and we flip the space. And then we have a new ceremony space on our lower level that's going to be a little bit more like the outdoors, but it's fully indoors. It's like white with like a big greenery wall. And that's in a room that used to be like used as a shooting range. So it's called the range, and that's truly what it used to be. And then, the office space that would have been used for officers is turned into a suite for getting ready. We have a suite in our lower level as well with like a pool table and dartboards and things of that nature, and just kind of using every bit of space that we have to the best of its ability, but kind of keeping it, again, historic as well.
I have a question that it might be a challenging question, but I'm fascinated by this because it sounds like an incredible space, right? And if you look online, and obviously we're going to have the links and everything for folks to check you guys out, but it sounds like such an incredible space. I'm curious, in your perspective, how much of your success would you attribute to the aesthetic or kind of functional quality of your space versus your team, the systems that you have in place, the marketing, some of those kind of like less tangible aspects?
It's a great question. It's definitely a combination. I love the aesthetics. I do our Instagram, I do our website, right? And those are my biggest focus. I after getting into this industry and I'm working on those pieces, I started doing photography myself because you really need high quality images in order to have success, in my personal opinion. But also, I wouldn't say that it can really be fully relied on as of like the space that you have. Like you can have a great space and it's not necessarily going to lead to success. You can have all of those aesthetics because, I would love to pave my parking lot. It hasn't happened yet, right? I would love to up our curb appeal. That hasn't happened yet. Our sign out front just got installed this past year. This is our 4th wedding season. So I wouldn't say that the aesthetics alone are what are going to create the business that you want. The team, being a family-run business, having a small team where the couples really get to know you throughout their planning process and can trust you with their day, I think that makes a huge difference for us. And that's something that I can see in the reviews that our couples leave where they're using our names and they're talking specifically about the people that they worked with in our space. And then also just like being incredibly transparent. And when we're booking our couples, I think that's something that they're looking for is like someone that feels like an expert in the industry, but also is going to be so honest with them. And I got married in 2021. I actually got married at our venue. And so I think that allows for some of our success is like being just like an like upfront and like an honest person, that the wedding industry can be stressful, it can be confusing, and we're here to aid you. That definitely is just as much of an important factor as the aesthetics of the space.
That makes a lot of sense. Would you be willing to share kind of what your booking numbers looked like? Obviously starting with your construction, maybe just a couple in that first phase, but what did it look like year over year over year? How did you guys see growth?
Yeah. I think something interesting about our particular space is because of COVID and probably because I had a blindfold on, I never worked in this industry before. We weren't sure weddings were necessarily fully the route we were going to go. Our growth is really unique. So the number of events I do hasn't really changed from year 1 to now. So 30 to 40 events is where we sit. Maybe I'll get to 50 one day. That's probably more than I really want. But my growth has been in the increase in my booking price, the increase in the add-ons that we've had, the number of events that are weddings versus other events that we're just filling our schedule in with, those are where the biggest difference in our growth has been. So I would say, and it's definitely kind of bobbled back and forth. I think that most people in this industry during COVID will attest to that. You know, the year after COVID was this boom of people that were looking to get married that either put it off, canceled it, postponed, eloped, all those things. So we booked 35 events our first year, with most of those being weddings, but they were at a lower rate than what I would book at now. And then as we grew each year, maybe some years there were less weddings and more other events on a slower year, like that year right after 2021, where, you know, things kind of slowed back down to a more normal rate of booking. And then they've increased again to now I only do a handful of other events a year, and I do primarily almost all weddings. And we're sitting at a more comfortable price range for us and what quality wedding vendors should be pursuing as far as what we're charging. So from our first year to now, we've increased our total revenue by over $300,000. So it's definitely a large increase, right? But the number of events hasn't changed drastically.
So I love that you mentioned that, because I think when someone new is coming to this industry, there may be a sense of, hey, we need to book 100 events a year. We need to book 60 or 80 events a year. And the quickest way to do more business is to book more weddings, right? And it sounds like what you just said, you've kept those bookings consistent, but you said increase the add-ons, you've increased the pricing. So that's really neat. And adding multiple six figures, I mean, that definitely changes things quite a bit on the financial side, especially given the fact that you're not really, it doesn't sound like you've changed expenses too much. Is that accurate?
Yeah. If anything, our expenses are going down as we've finished renovations. We've finished working with, say, engineers and different people to kind of get all of the legalities completed of the venue. So those things allow for us to be spending less upfront, but our staffing costs have gone up and things like that too. So there's always going to be an increase. Everything's more expensive now than when we opened as well, but not drastically. I do think it's fairly manageable as far as increased costs. And you can just, I would say what you were saying about like 100 events, right? That would be the mindset that my father had when we opened, right? It was like, we're going to do 100 events at this lower price, and that's how we're going to make this work. And when I say, he might not agree with how I decided to run things here, that's exactly the piece that we would be maybe on different sides of, is I don't want to do 100 events, and so I'm going to find ways that we can increase our offer and our value to the customer, and so that we can increase our price, because I don't want to be here 100 days out of the year. I want to go travel and do new things and have a flexible schedule, and I want my team to have that too. And so I would rather find the way to make the most out of each of those days and give our couples the highest quality event possible in order to reach our financial goals with less days of like on-site work.
Could we dive into that a little bit deeper? I want to talk a little bit more about the finances before switching to the operations stuff, but I'm curious, when you're evaluating a opportunity to kind of keep yourself at the, let's say, 30 to 50 wedding range per year, instead of adding volume, increasing value, what's the mental framework that you go through to do that process?
I think that the easiest way is for me is that I was a recent bride, so I can sit here and look at it from my own perspective of what are people looking for and how can I offer them the most possible in order to increase that price. So we kind of work from this like transparent pricing model. We do all taxes, fees, gratuities, things like that pre-included in the price. And I want to include as much of my offer in my price as possible. So I'm not a venue that has a huge guide with 47,000 offers and you got to go through and pick and add up and do all these things. I try to keep things very inclusive. So we do a venue rental price. We do the bar, so that's a big piece for us. That's an addition. And then my list of add-ons is like 5 or less, right? So we offer a shuttle. We offer like a pack-up cleanup where they pick up their decor the next day. I have dish rental in-house, and we just are adding some bigger decor pieces that they can rent from us. But I don't want it to be an overwhelming process where there's so many things to be adding. Instead, I'd rather like increase the value to the customer on my offer right up front. And that's what I'm increasing. I'm not adding a ton of extra pieces that they're then picking and choosing from. So my price is increasing overall, and it's increasing for everybody. It's not that I have to upsell in order to get those to the next level. It's just everything's increasing across the board.
Okay, so let me just say it back to you to make sure I'm picking up what you're putting down. Your model is you're going to increase your price. So maybe if you were at, I'm just going to throw out random numbers here, $8,000, you're going to go up to $10,000 and you're going to include more versus starting at $8,000 and saying, oh, you could add on this, you could add on this, and then your average price gets up to 10 or gets up to 12. Instead of that, you're just charging 10 or 12 and you're saying, hey, you're getting all this stuff.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So when I love that, like, and that's the way that we do a lot of our venues. You know, it's more of a blank canvas or creative canvas style. But I know there's a different school of thought out there, which is, you know, adding in all of these options, everything you were just talking about, right? And allowing that to be upsell opportunities for your sales team, and to kind of add those things in to allow for customization and allow to increase the price. And maybe allow it to be like, maybe, you know, not everyone needs X, Y, and Z, whatever it is. How do you want to create a customized experience, but you also don't want to be overly complex? Where's the line for you?
So I'm the sales team. And I want to upsell like that. I prefer to be super blunt with my couples, and I want a couple that's like, I want a day that feels like me. I want to choose my own vendors, but I'm also not looking to be sitting here with a calculator figuring things out. My couples are coming to me because they want a day that's unique, but they also are like no frills. And so those other models are exactly what my competitors in my area are doing, right? A wedding factory, they have all the things, right? So they're upselling you on everything. They're adding everything to your bill. In order for me to stand out in the industry, adding everything up front is my best bet, because it's different than what is available around me. And it's kind of like, it feels refreshing, and it allows for couples to feel like they could take a breath because they don't have to worry about the other shoe dropping when they realize that, oh, we didn't count in the cake cutting or whatever other pieces that someone's upcharging them. But there's definitely a balance. I think it's kind of a new school of thought that like really like transparent, everything's pre-included. Another area that my dad and I probably disagree, right? He used to work in car sales, so it's just it's a different version of selling. And so you would probably choose to add the uplighting separate and different things of that nature. We have add-ons. We have the dish rental. We have the shuttle. Not everybody needs those things. I don't pre-include those in the price. But my list is like 5 or less items so that it's not complicated. You can add them later. I want people to feel like I'm not necessarily trying to sell them on items, and instead I'm selling them on my experience and my knowledge and the ease of the day and the stress-free environment.
Sounds like taking out some of those options and making it more simple just intrinsically does make it more straightforward, which a wedding is already complicated enough as it is. There's already, you know, everything that goes into it. That's really cool. That's really, really neat. And I'm really glad you highlighted that. Was this something that you learned kind of through the process of owning the venue? Like you started maybe with more options and then trimmed the options down, or from day one, was this your philosophy?
Day one, this was my philosophy, and it's probably just due to like my experience isn't in sales, and I was coming at it from a bride perspective. I was planning my own wedding, and so if I'm going to sell this venue, then I need to do it in a way that I can sell it. and I'm not going to be able to sell you on upselling you on all these things. Like I tell every couple when they're coming in for their tour, like, don't add my dish rental now. Like, see if your caterer includes it. See if you can get a better deal somewhere else. And if you can, we're the best price, then add it later. And that's just kind of the sales approach that I take, because I'm approaching it more as a bride than I am as like a venue owner perspective. And so it wasn't necessarily, maybe it's not the best route, I don't know, but it seems to work well for us. And it brings in the kind of couple that I think our space is for. It's a little bit less, no frills, less stress. They're really more concerned about having quality time with their family and friends and a unique experience for their guests than they are all the tiny little details maybe.
That's cool. Pro tip for anyone who's listening or watching, that strategy, because I mean, whether it's done strategically or not on your side, telling the couple don't do something that benefits you actually creates a huge amount of trust, right? Because it's like, don't buy my dish rental. See if you can get it somewhere else. Immediately, just by saying that, they're like, wow, this is someone who I can trust. They're looking out for my best interest, not just their pocketbook. I love that. That's really cool.
That's why my price being just like straight across the board, that allows me to do that, because I'm not relying on upselling every one of these little things to hit my bottom line. My bottom line is hit based on my main piece that is the same for everybody. And then those other things are more of like an added benefit and ease for my couples. They make my day easier because it's better for couples to have it done right, and we can offer it to them done right, things like that. It's not necessarily because like I need to get everybody to have a dish rental in order to hit the number that I need to hit for the year.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought it around to there. So I wanted to ask something about the finance piece and kind of in the initial phases, what some of those conversations looked like. I want to go there and then wrap up today with just talking about some of the systems and maybe, like other places that you get exposure to the industry to kind of keep learning. So we'll wrap up with that. But the finance question that I had for you was, when you're sitting down with your family, you're figuring out what your budget for renovation is, the budget for the building, obviously some of these things. The experience that I have is you set yourself up for that early success or stress and possibly failure by everything that you do in the front. Like if you commit to a $60,000 or $80,000 a month mortgage because you're investing all this money, like you're gonna be stressed out trying to, get those deposits in and all that. So could you peel back the curtain a little bit and share how you and your family thought about funding this deal, and kind of what was maybe a benchmark or a threshold that you didn't want to go above so that you could keep things manageable financially?
So this is a term that I heard on your podcast about being lean and scrappy. And we've been talking a lot more about that recently, but I think that that's always been a motto that my dad in particular is really good at, is we do everything ourselves. We outsource almost nothing. And while in some ways that's not a benefit, in a lot of ways it is, and it keeps your bottom line really low, especially like on a month-to-month basis. So the shuttle bus, we own it. So whenever we rent it, that's a huge benefit to us. The same thing with our dishes. All of our renovations we did them ourselves. So there wasn't as many high overhead costs as a lot of times a new venue might experience. And that allows for your month to month to be much lower. The other benefit we have is this building has very little use to somebody as something else. So the overhead cost of purchasing was low in comparison to a lot of wedding venue spaces. It's a huge space, but what else can you do with it? Nothing. So those kinds of things allow for our month-to-month costs to be much lower. And then again, just like keeping everything in-house. My mom does the accounting. My dad, my husband, my father-in-law, they do all of the renovations themselves, all of the maintenance ourselves. Our cleaning is in-house. We don't outsource. And so those things allow for us to utilize our team as like multi-purpose. And so there's not a lot of like extra additional costs outside of just our regular staffing, and every person on my team has a very specific role that they play, but they're also a team player to like the top percent. And like my dad is fixing the toilets. And when we need some extra help on hands, like we're all here on a wedding day. And so those things allow for those overhead costs to be much lower than if you're having to pay a little bit to a lot of places.
Yeah. I love that you highlighted that the overhead side of it is such a finance killer. I mean, I'm going to do a financial episode one of these days because I've really been diving into it with a friend who actually has kind of become a mentor and almost a CFO in some ways. But when looking at the business that we do, and I would bet you, you know, for your business as well, the day-to-day cost for setting up and tearing down a wedding and even some of the sales process, that's going to be in the hundreds of dollars, you know, depending on the wage that you're paying people and all of that. It really is that overhead side. It's all the extra systems that you add. It's all the extra, you know, contractors and profit margins of everyone else's business that gets added in. And you're looking at a huge overhead here, but the actual day-to-day venue expense of throwing the wedding and hosting the wedding is fairly nominal compared to everything else.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, you know, there's things that cost a lot of money when we started this process. Things like in order to get our permits, we have to hire engineers and lawyers to get everything squared away with our parking lot and allowed to pave and all of those things, right? And so those costs are really high. But the day-to-day costs are very low. And so I say that because if you're starting a new venue, you know, you need to have either a financial backing. You need to be able to not rely on your business being successful right away and waiting out for those things to come around. But then once you get to that point, where some of those startup costs are kind of like cleared out, then our day-to-day is very low. And that allows for this business to be a little bit more evergreen than some of the other ventures that we've experienced in the past as a family, because, you know, we know what the costs are. They don't really change month to month. They're easy to look at on like a year-long basis. That's my favorite way to look at it, is like, here's what we total make for the year. Here's our total expenses for the year, kind of evening it out that way. And the overhead is a little bit lower, especially when you're doing everything in-house. Like, I know you said you wanted to talk a little bit about systems. I use HoneyBook. I don't use anything else. It's fairly inexpensive. And so we don't have a lot of extra fluff that we're paying for to keep things running.
Mm-hmm. So in addition to HoneyBooks, I did see the form on there. In addition to HoneyBook, are you using anything for like a communication system, lead software, Instagram posting tool, like any of these different systems for anything else that you do?
No. So it's me. I'm the system. HoneyBook does really work well for us at the moment. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't be interested in something else maybe in the future. We actually started with Planning Pod, but it was a little bit too robust for us. We don't do catering in-house. So that cuts down a lot of the logistics of maybe a fancier CRM. So HoneyBook is what we use as far as inquiries. It's what we use for our leads and our process through communications. Texts, calls, we just do them all right by hand, old school. And I post everything to Instagram. I used Planoly for a little bit, and I felt like it makes me too like hands off, and then I'm not looking at the trends. I'm not doing the reels that I really should be doing, and I do think it kind of funks up my my algorithm as well a little bit, just like less engagement. So I find that if I'm just doing it myself and hands-on, that it works a little bit better. And so yeah, HoneyBook is the only one we use. QuickBooks, I think, is what they use for accounting, but you know, nothing crazy. There's not a ton of other, we're not paying for anything else really.
That's cool.
Well,
that's up. Just
we are paying for wedding wire and not.
Gas. Just kidding. Tell me about that a little bit. Is because I think depending on who you talk to, some people swear by it. Some people have this huge aversion to those two platforms. What's your experience been like? good, bad, in between? What are your thoughts?
I think it's both exactly both ends of the spectrum that you just said. I feel both ways. As a starting new venue, it was a great tool for us. It allowed for us to book our first year. Basically, it's the only marketing that we did at the time. Now we're starting to work into Google Ads. My social media does bring in clients on its own. And so it's still bringing in a high enough number that it's worth paying for at this moment. But it's really like, it kills me when I'm literally up for renewal right now. And I just like dragging my feet on signing it because it feels like so much money to be spending for leads and for that advertisement source, and I would love to not be doing that at some point. But right now, it's still giving us a good number of bookings. It does give me a lot of work and inquiries because there's so many inquiries that come through there, and a lot of them are, they're very cold leads. All they want is pricing, and they're not really a good fit for our space. So it's a lot of weeding through and a lot of correspondence to get to the final result. Whereas like someone coming through your Google Ads, your website, your Instagram, they're a warmer lead. It's a lot less back and forth before they're like either ready to book or not. But currently still a benefit to us. Hopefully long term, not so much, but for now.
I think that was just really beautifully said, though. And I think it highlights, I think maybe some short-sightedness that our industry has, or folks that don't like those platforms, because I think it's a question of not if you're going to use it or not, but maybe when you're going to use it, right, and how you're going to use it. And I think certainly there are areas that it works better in than others, but it's not the only thing that you can do. You can post on social media, you can do some of these things, but if you need more leads and if you have the capacity to dig through that, it does drive leads. Now, of course, some folks will say there's fake leads on there or whatever. I think kind of going through and understanding that we can't be fully reliant on any one platform or any one source, and especially in the beginning, kind of needing every single lead you can get, there's really a case for using a platform like that. So that's really cool. I wanted to ask, what does the future look like for you and this business? And I guess the way that I'm asking that question, I'm wondering, is your goal to scale up and eventually kind of get out of the business? Do you want to stay in the business? What does it look like for you professionally?
Yeah. So I think we've had really fast growth, and so I'm starting to hit some of the goals that I have for what my piece in the business is. So, the first 2 to 3 years, I was at every wedding for the entire day. Our venue rental is 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. I'm there 8 a.m. till midnight, right? And I didn't have a baby yet, so that allows for that a little bit more. And I did every lead, every inquiry, every Instagram post, all of that was me. And now this year we've hired, before I had part-time, 2 girls. One's my bar manager, one's my day of coordinator. Now my day of coordinator is full-time. So she's doing tours. She's doing 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. and my bar manager is doing 6 p.m. till midnight, right? And so I'm not necessarily needed at the events. And so that piece, I'm kind of hitting what my goal is there. So I work during the week, more normal business hours. I can have the weekends off when needed, unless there's a problem and they're calling me up to bring in more beer or do something for whatever the, normal business owner things. But then as far as like the business as a whole, I think that, our goals are to continue to move the price, right? So from starting, we were at a true budget wedding where like your couple was bringing their food in their crock pots, and it was more of that potluck feel. They probably had a cash bar and there was almost no other vendors. So now we're sitting a little bit more middle of the road where we require you to use a licensed and insured caterer, and they have to be full service. So they're there for the event. And so most of my weddings, especially in the fall, they have an open bar now. And they're starting to have some vendors. So usually a professional photographer and DJ. And my goal isn't necessarily, it is to increase our prices and to make more money in our realm as well. But I want to see more couples that have the funds for like full service weddings. So I want to see bigger florals. I want to see more decor companies, stylists, wedding planners. Those are the pieces that are like my next goal. And those collaborations allow you to reach a different level of clientele that then allows for me to not be on Wedding Wire, not because they're not finding me there. So that's kind of where my next step of goals is more in the partnerships that we can create, the collaborations we can do, and kind of not that our couples are necessarily spending more money with us, but they're spending more money on their wedding day, which will allow us to reach that next level.
Understood. So overall higher budget couples, not necessarily more couples, not necessarily more money spent on the venue, but just kind of the overall production quality going up a little bit.
Yeah, and those things all like they all play together, right? So when you have a couple that's hitting a little bit of a higher budget, they might splurge for a top shelf bar, and that benefits us. And when they have all of those other vendors that are collaborating, they tag you on social media, they're sharing your posts, that like takes away from me having to spend dollars on marketing. So in turn, it does increase my profits, but it also just allows for a higher level of experience for the couples and for what my clients are seeing when they look at our venue, what kind of production level our space can provide them.
That's so cool. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. Just like the path that you guys have taken, the business. You guys are, I think it's really neat, like what you've done as a family together and how you've renovated the space. And, if people want to dig into what you're doing more, what's the best place for them to reach you?
Probably Instagram. That's where I am the most. So our Instagram is going to be the Armory Events, and I am the only person that's got the access. So you could send me a DM on there. I love to talk to other venue owners. And this podcast is something that I use really often in like looking at my business because it allows for me to see what other people are doing, and that's just so valuable in this industry. So I would love to chat with more venue owners and be able to kind of share experiences, because when you're starting out, it is kind of tricky to find that information anywhere.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for saying that. And I'm curious, where else do you get if venue owners listening to this right now and they are looking for more of those resources and things like that, where else are you getting insight and advice on a maybe venue level, but then also maybe general business level as well?
Yeah. I actually think that from the wedding industry perspective as a venue owner, some of the best information that I can find is by looking at other vendors that are not wedding owners, like venue owners. So looking at photographers, looking at wedding planners, things of that nature, because while they're not your client sometimes finds them first, or they're like more excited about those particular people. And so I find that like looking at my venue as a photographer or talking to those other vendors on what they want to see in a space, it allows for me to better create my package, my offerings. They see all different venues and all different models, and that can kind of be a unique way to look at things that can allow you to grow faster. And then, I wish there were more podcasts like this. I'm a big podcast listener. I would love to listen to more things that are talking specifically in the wedding industry, but I would just say like following other vendors on social media, venues as well, where you can see kind of the behind the scenes, how they're doing things and doing your research, like going to other venues' websites and looking at what their model is, how are they having success. It's not going to give you everything, but it can give you a little bit, and then not being afraid to reach out.
Definitely. As a shameless plug, people have to check out Weeva. And I don't know if you've heard me talk about that before on any of the shows or anything like that. But really, that's what we're trying to do with the Wedding and Event Venue Association. We're trying to create a space that is a professional association for people to really learn more about the industry, more than just a Facebook group, more than kind of one master class or personal coaching. It's more something kind of almost like a library of resources that they can go to. And so I share that, that's actually why I started the podcast. Because in 2020, when we started, it was like, what
Yeah.
like how do we do this, and how do we do this better? And I'm still looking for those things today. And I think it's interesting. This podcast ends up being a educational outlet for me as much as it is for everyone else, because I get to learn from you, and I get to learn from the pros that come on the show. And it's really cool. It definitely is like a rising tide that I hope will lift our community.
Yeah, I think it definitely is.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. This has been really wonderful, and I'm excited for everyone to hear this. And if they want to check out more pictures of your venue, we are going to have links to that. It is the armoryevents.com, the website. And then, like you said, the Armory Events on Instagram, where they can reach out to you. But yeah, thank you so much for being on the show today. This was awesome.
Thank you for having me. It was so fun.